The chair recognizes Senator Pintard.
Mr. Vice President, I wish to clarify matters that arose when I was last in the Senate, and so I fully expect that the time will not start until I'm through clarifying those matters. And I just want to be clear that that is the case.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President, when I was last in the Senate, two matters arose that was objected to by the side opposite. One of those matters related to the Rubis gas leak. I contended at that time that residents were suffering in a number of ways. One, being concerned for their health and the health of their children. Another was loss of business and potential loss of assets. And in one case, I cited a business just opposite the Rubis gas station that was unable to obtain insurance. The contention at that time in this place was that it was my representation and there was no corroborating information. I wish to read into the record the following. This is taken from the Nassau Guardian, from the National Review, under the title, Dropping the Ball. On page 15, it reads, Monday, April 20th, 2015, an extensive article. One paragraph reads, officials of BESS said Rubis was invited to send a representative to the town meeting.
On a point of order, Mr. Vice President, I'm not sure.
The chair recognizes Senator Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. He would have spoken on the last occasion, which was, I think, 2 weeks ago. The date of the report, the date of the letter, the thing is indicated, Mr. Vice President, is after when he was spoken. So I don't know if he could refer to that because that would have been after he spoke.
Officials of the BESS
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. President, I am on a point of order. I would like him to answer, please. Come on now.
Thank you, Senator.
Let me reemphasize. You're not the Vice President. When you get there, then you can make the point. You could do whatever you wish, but until that time, you make my point of order. My point of order is, at the time he made the point, that was not published, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, point of order.
I'm not finished my point. Can I finish my point?
The non-publication of a document in the possession of the government is no excuse.
Senator Bell, please have your seat. Are you completed, Senator Bell?
Mr. Vice President, thank you.
Senator Bethel, you are the point of order. You're now recognized.
Thank you. I find it offensive that the senator opposite should stand in this place, Mr. President, and say that because a document in the possession of the government that contained what now turns out to have been explosive, for want of a bad pun, information that was held by the government for more than a year without disclosure, could not, he's justifying them objecting to us referring to its findings 2 weeks ago on the basis that, well, it was a private document and hadn't been disclosed. It is a public document. It was held by the government and they suppressed it.
That is not my point of order.
Thank you, Senator.
Suppressing it.
Mr. Vice President, I'm sure, Mr. Vice President, you understood the basis of my point of order. I understood what he had to say.
You said it hadn't been published.
Thank you very much. Have a seat, senators. Senator Pintard.
Mr. Vice President.
Senator Pintard, one moment, please. One moment, please. The chair is going to permit you to continue, and the chair will then determine how to proceed. But please continue with the presentation you're presenting.
Officials of BEST said Rubis was invited to send a representative to the town meeting, but no one from Rubis was present to explain the company's actions after the gasoline release, which has created great consternation amongst area residents and business people, some of whom said they cannot get insurance on their buildings due to the contamination. So, Mr. Vice President, I adopt these words as my own. I'm prepared to sign it and send it forward. And just simply to make the point, I was not interested at that time in sharing the name of the individual, but I represented at that time that what I was saying was in fact accurate, and it was the tip of the iceberg in terms of the level of suffering persons in that community has been experiencing with full knowledge of the government, the PLP government of the Bahamas.
Senator Pintard, the manner in which you have approached this is not necessarily to the satisfaction of the chair. I'll tell you why. At the time of your public utterance, when we last sat, thank you, you indicated to the chair that you had information that you will confirm. I think the president was in the chair at that time and presented this place. What you have presented this morning would not have been information you had in your possession at the time. You're using the reference of a newspaper article which came weeks later. But what I understand the position of the chair.
I understand.
And the chair takes the position very, very seriously, and the matter, of course, because it's a very serious national concern, because it affects the health of persons. I think everybody in this place agrees with that. It's not a question of politics at all. You're talking about people's health and people's lives. And so, when you made representation, in the chair's opinion at the time, you gave colleagues an indication that you will bring back to this place information that will substantiate what you were stating.
That is correct. That is essentially what I did.
In the chair's opinion, unless you have other information other than this newspaper article which was published weeks after you would have presented your facts, you are now inviting this chamber, in the chair's view, to accept as what you indicated earlier as fact based on something that happened after you would have spoken. And so do you have with you any information that you can share with this chamber that would have been available to you at the time that you made that statement that you're willing to put on the table on the table at this time?
Mr. Vice President, you have misrepresented, and I'm sure unintentionally, the remarks that I made when last in the Senate. I never made the point that in my possession, at home, in my safe, I made the point that to my knowledge, based on discussions and interviews with residents, that this is factual. The only requirement of me was to return to this place with corroborating information, not information that I had at some point in the past. This is now in the public domain. And I'm saying if the chair wishes to somehow look at the letter of the law, which I do not believe the chair will be supported by based on the rules that I have in my possession, the chair would be, in my view, making a grave mistake given the nature of the issue that we're discussing. Because I know, the public knows, that this is factual. So what the chair is seeking to undertake is to have information that is factual not included in the record of the Senate. I do not believe that the Vice President wished to have that decision made.
Before you speak, Honourable Government Leader, I think the leader on the opposite side wanted to make a point. I think that may clarify perhaps what you were saying.
Firstly, thank you, Mr. President. Firstly, I would say that what Senator Pintard just said is exactly my recollection, that he was speaking about information gleaned from persons at ground zero. He never undertook to produce anything like a report or something that may have been leaked to him. So I think we all have defective memories in that regard, and I think that he has sufficiently at least agreed with you on this point that he did undertake to try and bring some further information, but not a report, because he never said he had one or access to one. That's the first point I wish to make. Second point I'd wish to make is, because it goes directly to the transaction that occurred. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. President. You are the first person in authority in this government to acknowledge the obvious. That this is a serious matter. It involves the life, the health, and the welfare of untold hundreds, if not thousands of people. We don't know how far the effects of that spill are extended. I do know. My father used to live in Marathon Estates. I have family that lived and still live in Regency Estates. I have family that live in right across the road from the Rubis gas station. Every house I know about was taking well water for years. What I'm saying is this now, and I want to make a point. I congratulate you on acknowledging publicly what is obvious to every other Bahamian except the members of the PLP cabinet. Or what appears to be obvious to every other Bahamian in this country except.
Thank you very much, Senator Battle.
Apart from that, I now wish to make a point about the transaction that occurred at the last Senate meeting. I intervened in that matter. And I said that the things that Senator Pintard pointed to were reflected in my dialogue with concerned residents more than a year ago when they consulted me. I attended a meeting with them in the schoolroom. I and my associate counsel, Michael Fuchs. In preparation for that meeting, I explained, and I said it in here, I had done research on these issues. And I said, in this place, this is before the report was made public. In this place, I said that there was every likelihood that there were carcinogenic elements in the gasoline that was there. It was not the gas itself which would spread on the top of the water, and if you had a well going down, you wouldn't be sucking the gas itself. It was a plume of additives in the gasoline. That is what my research. And the plume went infinitely down and wide, so it could have spread everywhere. And I was told by a member on the other side who stood up, a senior member, that I shouldn't use the word carcinogen, cancer-causing agent. Yes. And I was absolutely mortified, horrified, and fundamentally outraged. Yes. When that report was made public, and the fact was also made public that the government sat on it for more than a year, because in that report it said exactly what I said in this place 2 weeks ago. And this government must account to the Bahamian people. They can sit around and beat Senator Pintard up with technicalities about whether he could go and produce into the record of this Senate a piece of paper in a newspaper. But no, Mr. President, they must account.
Thank you very much, Senator Battle.
It's a collective decision, and the entire lot of them need to step down, resign, call an election, and take the blows that they thoroughly deserve.
Thank you very much, Senator Battle.
And put the lives of thousands of Bahamians at risk.
Yes.
People were settling their claims against Rubis for pennies, for Hook Up the Water and Sewerage Corporation, and for
Senator Battle, thank you very much.
And the government had the information and suppressed it.
That's right.
They suppressed it.
Even now.
Mr. President, the last point I'll say is this, that under no circumstances should the rules of this place be used to suppress
much. There's no
facts.
obviously,
Thank you, Mr.
please.
President.
Even now.
Thank you very much. Let me assure you and all of the members on your side that there is no attempt on the part of this chair to suppress any information. Absolutely. Senator Gibson wanted to make a point. Chair recognizes you.
Mr. Vice President, I do know we're coming to 1 o'clock. My recollection of the last sitting is that the President, I was concerned about the Honourable Senator Pintard, referring to, as a fact, to the inability for certain people to obtain insurance. And it was I who asked him to put the evidence forward. And I asked for names, and I indicated that I didn't need to have them, and I think that the President herself indicated that she would be happy to receive the names. And I think that that is the point that is being made this morning, and that is that what is being produced now is not the kind of evidence, but you've already made a ruling on that, Mr. President. I also want to point out, Mr. President, that the Minister responsible for the environment, Mr. Vice President, the Minister responsible for the environment, and the Minister who is the representative for the area, have already started their community consultations on the matter. The report of which the members on the other side speak is published, Mr. President. The evidence is clear, Mr. President, that those who were directly impacted by the incident knew about the incident, those directly impacted.
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President.
What is the point of order? What is the point of order? What is the point of order?
Senator Pintard, please have a seat. The chair, it is my time to speak. The Attorney General's time will be honored. No, this is what is the additional point. Everybody just sit down and what is the additional point? Why you keep jumping up with the additional point? What's happening here today? Spoke for an hour. Senator Pintard, your time is not affected, but please do allow the chair. The chair has been, I believe, more than fair. It allowed the leader on the opposition side to speak.
You speak every day.
And without interruption from the other side, it is now allowing the government leader on this side to speak. Please do. We have the issue in the chair's view is important, and the chair is giving a level of fairness and flexibility to allow those who wish to speak to the matter. This doesn't affect your time at all. Your time is going to be there. And so the chair will allow Senator Gibson to continue with a point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. It is clear, uncontrovertible, in the very report of which the persons on the other side speak, that those directly impacted immediately knew of the incident. It is clear. It is clear. It is clear that remediation in accordance with international standards immediately commenced and is continuing. And that the recommendation that the community be consulted has happened and is continuing. Clear, Mr. Vice President. So I will not allow those on the other side to miscast the responsible actions by this government, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Vice Chairman, I note the hour and I move that the business of the Senate to suspend until 3 o'clock.
Is the member prepared to explain the delay on the government? A year and a half on the adjournment. Is the member prepared to explain to the Bahamian people why the government suppressed the report for more than a year? Explain that.
It has been moved and seconded. Are
you prepared to explain that? Stop covering up. Stop covering up.
Silencing the voice of the people.
All those in favor
Shameful.
would indicate
Shameful.
by saying aye.
Shameful. Not even
Those
the
opposed,
appearance of
nay.
trying to ventilate this issue.
The ayes have it.
Appearance.
The business of the session is suspended until 2:30 p.m.
Please. President, before we went on the break, I was clarifying the first point required by Madam President in our last sitting, and I just wanted to be clear that those remarks remain on the record, that as a result of the Rubis gasoline leak in Marathon, there are members of the public whose commercial building were unable to secure insurance because of the leak. The second point of clarification, Mr. Vice President, relates to the presentation I was making concerning the leak of hydrocarbons into Clifton Bay from BC. And it is so fascinating that in both the Rubis matter and in the Clifton matter, I was interrupted repeatedly by members on the opposite side. And I made the point that these matters have certain things in common. One of those things is the incessant desire to interrupt me as I lay out the case that the government is not doing a good job, both as a regulator and in terms of, in my estimation, my opinion, protecting the public health. The second thing those two matters have in common is the presence of hydrocarbons being leached into Clifton Bay. And so I was asked last time that when I return, I ought to indicate the date that these photographs were taken. And so I've undertaken to do just that and to present them. The photographs, the areas of Clifton Pier were taken on September 14, 2014. The picture of the two ladies were taken on January 1st, 2015. And this is a part of a note from Mr. Lloyd Chung, Envirologic International Limited, P.O. Box F40163, Freeport, Grand Bahama. His number is available, and if the government wishes to give someone residing in Freeport some business to assist us in that economy. And Mr. Lloyd Chung laid this out, and this is relevant. If you would look at the photograph, you would see in the catchment I sought to mention in the last sitting, oil accumulating. You would also notice in the next photograph I'll show that this area is blackened as a result of oil, unfortunately, having at various times covered this ground. And subsequently, look at the distance. From here all the way here, oil has seeped into the water table, traveled underground, and ended up here. And for those of us that know West Nassau, we can see the distance. And to further underscore the point, here's the black area. Again, and there are Bahamian workers who are in this environment. And I think we all acknowledge now that these hydrocarbons are potentially very dangerous. I'm going through them quickly. I don't want to miss the point of getting to the failure of swift justice. And here are the plumes on the water. Imagine this for a moment. Emissions from all the way over here enter into the water, and look at the film on the water. These were carried by a local daily as well months ago, but with minimal response from those who are responsible. Petroleum hydrocarbons seeping into the coastline, underground. So this is the
I do
water.
rise on a point of order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes Senator Gibson, a point of order.
The statement of minimal response from those who are responsible is completely inaccurate, as the Honourable Senator well knows. I indicated the last time that we met, and that was in April, the date was what? April 16th. But as we were speaking on that day, there was somebody engaged by the government actually on site engaging in remediation, an internationally accepted firm. So it is incorrect for the Honourable Senator to say that, and I wish he would desist from misleading the public.
Mr. Vice President, if I was being disingenuous or mischievous, I would have said no proper response from the government, but I didn't go there. I said minimal, and here's why I say minimal. Twice in the last month and a half, 2 government ministers have used no teachees phrase, teachable moment. The Progressive Liberal Party appears to be an organization that does not learn well from past mistakes, whether it's by the Free National Movement or by them in their previous machination. We are in the midst of one of the worst catastrophes to hit Bahamians in the Rubis oil spill and the subsequent withholding of a report for a year. I'm raising in here minimal response because in our last sitting when I was present, I asked Madam Attorney General, to what extent has the public been given sight of the management plan and the remediation plan? I don't doubt that a company has been retained for the sum of approximately $10 million. I don't doubt that. What I have argued is that in this room, for whatever the figure is, so Madam Agency, whatever.
No. That's not
A point of order?
See, Mr. Vice President, let me say that if I knew what the figure was, I would have no problem saying it. I really cannot say here today. But for the Honourable Senator to so easily let it slip off his tongue, $10 million, is he able to verify the sum? He can't do things like that and mislead the public. What is important, Mr. Vice President, is that situation has been in existence for decades.
That's right.
What is important is that this administration is addressing it in accordance with the highest international standards. That is what's important.
Mr. Vice President, I don't see why you would be, I don't see why persons would be spanking the table for the release of hydrocarbons into the environment. It makes absolutely no sense. And we have said the last time we were here, whether under the Free National Movement or the Progressive Liberal Party, it is absolutely irrelevant. What I am saying, and I repeat it, I mentioned 10 million last time based on an article I was under the impression I read. I was not challenged then. If it's not 10 million, certainly I would be happy to withdraw that, no problem. But this is the point. Here's the substantive point. The substantive point is, to date, in this room right now, no senator knows, including the Attorney General, does not know what the management plan is, the environmental management plan. We don't know what the remediation plan is. By extension, the public does not know. And this is relevant, and it's even more relevant this week, given what we now know about Marathon. See, last week, that was a stab. When I was here last and raised that issue, persons in the community may have gotten the impression, listening to the other side, that this was a stab in the dark. Only 2 weeks later to find out how devastating the facts were. And that's what all I'm saying is, not just for the PLP or the F&M, for Bahamians. It's important that they know that the government has touted the importance of Albany, of Clifton Heritage, of Jaws Beach, of Lyford Key. All of these areas are potentially impacted by this issue. So we don't, and we should not, have confidence in just a handful of people having knowledge about something that has national implication. They have an obligation to share the information as widely as possible. And only arrogant politicians believe only them ought to know the facts, and we shouldn't. And spending our money while they do it. This is what we are up against. People fish in these waters. dive in these waters. And so I'm simply saying, and I say without apology, the government has an obligation in Clifton to do what they failed to do in Marathon, and to be transparent about what the extent of the situation is. We are told by the Deputy Prime Minister that the government is engaged in discussion with a strategic partner with a view of them acquiring BEC. Are they having candid discussions about what we are facing at Clifton? And no, governments are continuous. My point is we should get it right and we should be transparent. And so these are the pictures. These are the two young ladies. And let me help out if I get my colleagues help, just to hide these so that we have no conniptions. This is the picture. Two tourists who went diving off Clifton came up with oil on them. We have to move with urgency if we are interested in protecting our environment for Bahamians and by extension for those who visit the Bahamas. Mr. Vice President. Mr. Clerk, you can feel free to start my time for me now, sir. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, by way of the clerk, I'd like to now begin my presentation. Let me begin, Mr. Vice President, by first speaking very, very briefly to a point raised by the Minister of State for National Security. If someone were to tune in and listen to the Minister of State for National Security as he speaks about the government's crime plan and their attempt to arrest the lawlessness that exists in our country and the carnage that we are experiencing on our streets, one would think for a moment listening to him that he has never served on the Royal Bahamas Police Force, or he has no knowledge of a number of the influential young men at the street level who have influence over some of those who are in fact wreaking havoc. You would think for a moment that the Progressive Liberal Party has never had an opportunity to govern, and that we did not have a drug culture in the 1970s and 80s that produced the monster of a problem that we have in 2015. You would not think that. Because the Minister of State for National Security seeks to give the appearance that we are all blameless in this matter. But the truth of the matter is, many Bahamians, inclusive of the Progressive Liberal Party, has contributed to where we are today. I find it amazing that in all the statistics the Attorney General has shared, that the Attorney General has been very careful not to dwell on the remarkable increase in homicides in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I find it remarkable that the Attorney General and members opposite seem not to focus on the fact that our conviction rate still remains low. And so on our streets right now, there are many persons who have committed murders who are still free. We are all in this together. Criminals should get a message about how they change their lives, how they could be empowered so they can transition out of criminality. They should get that message from the politicians who have employed them during election. Unfortunately, many young men who have had close interaction with some political figures have had interaction only to the extent of delivering votes for those politicians and their side, but have not received that message that their lives could be different. And it is my hope that as politicians speak in the public domain, or they share, in whether it's the law or the upper house, that all of us would speak against that backdrop, that we have an obligation when we interact with young men who are not on the right side of the law, that we constantly challenge them to do the right thing. Mr. Vice President, where is the swift justice for the people in Marathon? Today we have come here to talk about the jury's amendment. And a part of the rationale for doing so is to ensure that we streamline our system, that the judicial system becomes more efficient and effective, that we increase the participation of our citizens in the judiciary, and that the outcome is that when matters arise that have to be adjudicated, that it can be done so efficiently and effectively. Justice delayed, I've heard, is oftentimes justice denied. And since we are talking about an amendment that is supposed to ensure proper dispensation of justice for citizens, it is only fitting for me to ask, as I will ask continually this afternoon, where was the swift justice for the people of Marathon? Mr. Vice President, when you look at the rules of the Senate, the rules of the Senate enables, for example, this government to suspend a debate that is going on in order to address another subject that is of national importance. It's contained in the Senate rules. We have the ability to do so. It is amazing to me that we are in this place having this discussion, and a disproportionate amount of the contribution of the members opposite is about the jury's bill. Simple issue. Why we want to increase the jury pool, how we want to streamline the system. It's a very brief discussion. But we should be addressing the things that affect Bahamians in the here and now. One of the reasons persons are disillusioned with politicians is they believe that we are not responsive to their needs. That we can't fully empathize or sympathize with what they're going through because we live a different reality. Now, some persons may be fine with that. I'm not. Because I know many Bahamians out there are angry with political figures in this country. And the way this Progressive Liberal Party runs its legislative agenda feeds into that anger and disillusionment and cynicism that people have. Because we are in here today running on about jury's amendment, and we'll do so for 45 minutes, an hour, and don't mention the fact that the government had carriage of a study that revealed that persons' lives were at risk in Marathon, and held on to that study for over 1 year. Knew about it for at least 2, but held on to it for over a year. Let me draw an analogy for a moment, Mr. Vice President. It is similar to us being aware that we have a sister or a mother who has entered into a relationship, and somehow we learned she was in a relationship with a serial killer. We would feel the obligation to inform her, to inform them that the person with whom you've entered into a relationship can potentially harm your life. Well, in Marathon, this government became aware that residents were living every single day with a carcinogen in their well, with fumes being emitted in their living rooms, in their bedrooms, and didn't think for a moment that it was necessary to inform the persons they claim to care about that you are living with a potential killer in your midst. In fact, one gentleman told a heart-wrenching story that the water he is drinking in Marathon, he made Kool-Aid for his 2 daughters with that water. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine any of us who've knocked on doors day in and day out, looking in people's faces, telling them how much we care about them, how much we need their support. And then we discover after we've gotten their support, that their lives are at risk. And instead of warning them, you see, it's one thing if the government decided that it was not going to take certain actions to remedy residents' situation. But not even giving them an opportunity to find remedies of their own is merely, and for some of them I'm sure, quite unforgivable. So, Mr. Vice President, when we talk about swift justice, when we show statistics, a part of the public being able to believe those that speak and believe even the figures that are presented, the public must believe that persons are acting consistently with integrity, that persons are acting in their best interest, and what is being shared could be taken at face value. It is implicitly true what is being shared. But against the backdrop of this report being released, I would find it very difficult to find Bahamians who believe the words of many of their leaders. Mr. Vice President, the final recommendation in this report is that at a minimum, the government should undertake to educate the public about the nature of the danger that they are facing. Just educate them. In other words, establish a newsletter to update persons on what progress is being made through any remediation efforts. To share with them what steps they might take to protect themselves. To give them options that if they decide they wanted to move out of the affected area. That education campaign came as a result of pressure on the government and revelations no less than in this place. The government released information that should have been released under, in my estimation, under duress. This morning, Madam Attorney General made the point, a point made by others, including the Minister of Education, including the Minister of Environment. To date, certainly in this recent revelation, we have not heard from the Minister of Health or the Prime Minister. But the three ministers made the point that they are satisfied that all remediation efforts took place consistent with the best international standards. One of those initiatives suggests that residents were contacted and they were kept up to date on developments. Let me read for a moment, Mr. Vice President, comments offered by Annie Laurie Monroe, a resident of 1 Grace Avenue. Mrs. Monroe said the first communication from the government over the matter was by a hand-delivered letter, dated March 8, 2013, from the Department of Environmental Health Services, which informed residents, and get this, that the department would be conducting water sample collection and testing on March 10. It was explained that the exercise was a standard practice when there was evidence, when there's evidence of fuel or oil leaks. She said there was no further contact from the government until November 15, 2013. Signed affidavit, 8 months later. And all other tests that took place involving the Monroe family, it took months for them to even get an answer, not on the results. To date, they've not gotten the results. Just to get an answer, they were unable to reach their member of parliament. Could you imagine? Could you imagine government officials encouraging struggling citizens to sue Rubis as opposed to the government discharging its duty and maybe suing Rubis on behalf of the residents? It's mind-boggling. So citizens are left to fend for themselves. So, Mr. Vice President, I humbly submit to you that this ongoing debate of the jury's amendments bill is misplaced given the recent revelations. This should not be what is occupying our time today. What we should be about is setting up a systematic testing campaign in Marathon. Not people presenting to medical institutions in the event that they experience certain symptoms. What nonsense is that? And civil servants ought not to buy into political narrative and start mouthing the nonsense they hear politicians say. Citizens should not submit for testing if they experience or they believe. The government should take the initiative and establish a group of doctors. After all, Swift Justice said, we are trying to increase the number of courts for what reason? So that we can hear more cases. For what purpose? To clear up the backlog. My God. If we are about the business of increasing the number of courts, in order for us to hear more cases, we are being deliberate and intentional about that. You're telling me we can't be deliberate and intentional about marathon? The Progressive Liberal Party government should line up every available doctor to go into that community or to set up wherever they need to set up, in whatever institution, so that persons can come in and be tested. Don't say we didn't have the money, it was cost prohibitive. It wasn't cost prohibitive to allocate $9 million to Carnival. It's not cost prohibitive to travel extensively around the world, supposedly doing the people's business. And in fact, all of a sudden we have found international partners in non-governmental and intergovernmental agencies who will now partner with us in order to address this health crisis that we are facing. You mean that did not occur to us 1 year ago? Secondly, if the government was committed, apart from setting up a whole lot of doctors in order to assist these residents, we should be setting up psychologists to now counsel persons. Because if any one of us in here, and several of us have shared our stories, where we've had relatives who've been ill, and the stress that it has caused us, the fear of something else being wrong with us or them, that fear and the stress that and the burden it has put on us psychologically and otherwise. Could you imagine the thousands of residents in Marathon, and not just Marathon, other communities where similar leaks may be taking place? Mr. Vice President, this is really one of the most difficult issues that I have ever spoken to in my life. Because I find it mind-boggling that in a country where the incidences of cancer is higher than most countries per capita around the world, I find it mind-boggling that the government could have discovered one contributing factor to those high incidences and never bothered to come forward and come clean with this public. That is mind-boggling to me. And so Senator Bell talked about going beyond politics. Well, my position is simple. Bahamians ought to be outraged. And I don't care which government it was that was in power. Bahamians ought to be outraged. No government official who's elected in this country has the right to withhold this kind of information from the Bahamian people. They do not have the right. And even after doing so, have the gall to tell this community they are satisfied that the right thing was done. What I would say to members of the public, if that's the kind of leadership you want, then that's the kind of leadership you deserve. And so for me, this isn't about politics. This is about making decisions that are in your best interest. It isn't possible I could sit around a cabinet table and hear damning information as is contained in this report. And I agree by any stretch of the imagination that I'd be silent on this. There's no possibility. No possibility. The question is, how long does it take for benzene to have an adverse impact on someone's health? We've heard varying figures. But every figure that we have heard suggests that less than 365 days can result in substantial damage to one's health, which also suggests that had members of the public been informed in sufficient time, we're not talking about guarantees, we're not talking about exact science, but we're saying we increase the chance of diminished impact on their lives. This government has failed in that regard. To what extent are we moving with haste now to set up a global policy where we are able to go and systematically test every service station in this country? And not just service station, I just pointed out. To what extent are we moving quickly to address this issue where hydrocarbons are being seeped into Clifton Bay and into the water table out west? And so the water table, because again, I just mentioned the sea, but the water table is such that the hydrocarbons that are seeping at Clifton, as with Marathon, could be traveling for miles, affecting Gambia, Mount Pleasant Village, Carmichael Road. All of these areas that are near and dear to many of our lives. And so we have an obligation to demonstrate for the Bahamian people that no, this is not about politics, that we are prepared to work with each other in terms of getting to the bottom of this, because many lives are at stake. The country is so small. If you talk about a 3-mile radius, which is suggested may impact, that may have been impacted by the Rubis leak. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if there are other gas stations having a similar problem, then we're talking about covering really the island. It's a small island. And so I'm saying, particularly to the members of the public, this is possibly the most serious issue that many of you will face in your lifetime. I'm saying to the young members of the Progressive Liberal Party, do not tie your legacy with those ministers that remain silent in the face of the most damning information that they could have possibly ever seen while sitting as a minister. Don't tie your fate with them. They really have forfeited their right to offer leadership in this country. And so when I listen to those persons who had this kind of information and said nothing and did nothing, it's very difficult for me to take them seriously. Because this isn't just private information that impacts them. Because sometimes we hold on to information, and later on it may be discovered that it was poor judgment in doing so. But if the impact of that information impacts you alone, those close to you, that's one thing. But when it impacts the life of the country, some lawyers may even argue that there is culpability on behalf of some members of this administration.
Mr. Vice President, just a point of clarification.
Chair recognizes Senator Gomez.
The good senator keeps waiving a report. I just want to know if he's prepared to table the report. Right. And then, as per Rule 66, paragraph 7, where any senator quotes from a book, journal, paper, or document in speech, if the President orders the senator to do so, the senator shall make it available to other senators for use during the debate. Can I?
Yes.
So request the President to make it available to other senators?
It's a fair request.
Thank you very much, Senator Gomez.
Yes, Mr. Vice President, I'd be more than happy to do so. In fact, I know this report quite well, as your cabinet colleagues do as well, and so you could certainly begin perusing that. Any of the other documents, I'd be more than happy to make available. This is the article written by Ava Turnquest, Tribune reporter, that quoted the contents of the affidavit of Miss Ava of Miss Monroe, and this is also available. I've highlighted for your benefit sections of that document as well. Mr. Vice President, we have an opportunity today, Mr. Vice President, and it is my hope that Madam Attorney General would intervene in this discussion upon my completion and provide leadership for all of us in here by making the point that what has happened in Marathon is so serious an issue that we are going to redirect our conversations to what can be done now. I sought to offer some recommendations, as will my colleagues when they speak. One, we should immediately come clean in terms of which of the recommendations have been implemented and make a public commitment. We will no longer repeat the phrase, we are satisfied that all remediation efforts have been employed according to international best practices. It does not do anything to aid others in believing the words of politicians in this country when we continue to say that, when the most basic of the recommendations. The final point, put in place an educational campaign. It did not happen. It did not happen. So we need leadership from the Progressive Liberal Party in order to mobilize doctors in Marathon, mobilize attorneys so that the attorneys can assist these families. In fact, the Attorney General's office should be spearheading efforts on behalf of Bahamians. Not on behalf of cabinet colleagues or Jessica, on behalf of Bahamians. The people in Marathon are Bahamians. And the last time I checked, they voted for the Progressive Liberal Party, the majority of them. So they shouldn't be encouraged to go and sue Rubis alone. No, they should be falling in line behind their leaders who are taking Rubis to task. That's what leadership does. Leadership doesn't try to figure out which direction the mob is heading in and then run in the front. Leadership takes initiative. Imagine this. In one house, equipment was installed to measure the vapor in the living room. Senator Russell, they never went back to tell the person what the results were from the study. Never told them. Samples were taken from wells. Today, people don't know what was the outcome from those samples. Houses were then connected to city water, and somehow some corporate executive and some government official felt that that was a substantial step to remedy a life-threatening situation. Members on this side sat here and were accused of having contributed to murder in this place. By the closure, we were told, of urban renewal, that as a result of the closure of urban renewal, persons lost their lives because, one, they could have been engaged positively. Two, they didn't have the security of police officers. In this place, that was said. And that example, which could be challenged, pales in comparison to this. The government had full knowledge of the potential risk and did nothing. Did not release the report that gave people an opportunity to respond. Mr. Vice President, the government, through the Ministry of the Environment, has a responsibility for protecting the environment and for public safety. The Act is very clear in that regard. If someone has oversight for that ministry and fails to discharge their responsibility, the question is, are they suitable to remain in that position? The Ministry of Responsibility for the Environment has the responsibility to ensure that no company is emitting any toxic substance, gaseous substance, or any substance that can have an adverse effect on human life. If that ministry and its officials become aware that that has happened, is happening, one of the responsibilities is to inform those stakeholders that are involved, businesses and residents. If that is not done, I ask members of the public and members in the Senate what should be the appropriate course of action. A Minister of Health has a responsibility to protect the health of the country. It's a regulator and in terms of the government chief advisor on those things that can benefit the health of the country. If a Minister of Health does not act when armed with information as contained in this report, what should be the appropriate course of action a Prime Minister should take or a minister should take in light of that failure? A Member of Parliament, once he or she becomes aware that those that have invested their trust in him or her are at risk and fail to remedy it or to inform them of what they are facing. What is the appropriate course of action that they should take, or those who they report to should take? If all concerned who I've mentioned point to another government official and claim that they were not empowered to act because they were not authorized to act, the question becomes, on what basis was that authority withheld? And what should be the appropriate course of action for that government official? Mr. Vice President, this brings us to an even deeper matter in terms of what is wrong with this system in the Bahamas. We must come to a point where no Attorney General should be sitting in the cabinet of the Bahamas. It is an inherent conflict of interest in the system. One cannot rely on the independence of the office of the Attorney General to adjudicate matters relative to his or her colleagues. We cannot rely on the independence of the Attorney General's office if he or she is sitting next to ministers who need to be investigated. Can an Attorney General still exercise integrity? Yes, I believe they can. Is it likely to happen with human beings being who they are? No. So if we are going to fundamentally transform the Bahamas to truly meet modern needs, then we must improve and change the actual structure of governance in the Bahamas. This ought to be the last administration where the Attorney General has such a cozy relationship that this country has enjoyed for decades with other cabinet colleagues. This is a matter that we ought to discuss with the Bahamian people and begin to make fundamental adjustments. It is a situation where governments are conflicted. In fact, just recently, we were dealing with a matter where you had a sitting, for example, administrator who could be confused about whether or not a minister is their boss or is the Chief Justice their boss. All of these are examples of how our system is conflicted. And so I say to the new generation of politicians who are in the Progressive Liberal Party, this is an opportunity to get your organization, as us on this side is getting our organization, to begin to behave and think differently so that this system could be responsive to our people. Who do the people of Marathon now appeal to for justice? Since swift justice, as we know it under the PLP, has failed them. There's no swift justice in Marathon. There's no swift justice in any community where tanks are corroded and possibly leaking carcinogens into the water table. This talk of swift justice, we have to be tired of these terms that are coined, but not delivering the goods that can save our people's lives. Mr. Vice President, as I conclude my remarks, I assure you, the Free National Movement, our leader, Dr. Hubert Minnis, our colleagues, we will not rest on this issue until real justice comes for the people of Marathon. We will not rest on this issue until arrogant ministers who feel they have nothing to answer from this public are no longer in those privileged positions which are being abused. Could you imagine? Reporters asking a minister about not following recommendations and they simply dismiss it out of hand. I'm satisfied that everything that should be done has been done. That kind of arrogance is not good for public life. It's unsuitable and unbecoming of a government minister. And those ministers ought to go and go now. As I take my seat, Mr. Vice President, I wish to just address a matter I believe that is of concern to those of us who believe in freedom of speech. And I wish to say this. and be unequivocal in this regard. I have seldom run away from a fight. And I say seldom only because when in school, if there's 20 fellas coming to gang me, I'm absolutely not stupid. I'm prepared to retreat so that I can live another day. But I would say this to the Progressive Liberal Party that seeks to muzzle the press and muzzle the opposition, that we are not prepared to back down from any threats. Threats of being jailed, threats of being sued. I'm prepared to continue to speak truth to power. I had the unfortunate experience while away with my daughter of hearing from my family members that police had visited my house on two separate occasions. They may have been sent by a law firm acting for a member of the government. What I found interesting about this, I'm not going to make it absolutely remarkable, but what I found interesting is that in Grand Bahama, I have two offices. One at the Grand Lucayan and one at West Sunrise. In New Providence, I have an office. It's on Marquis Street. I'm one of the most accessible persons. So you could reach me if you really want to reach me. But to go to my house. But to go to my house. To send an officer to my house. This reminds me of something. It reminds me of when Darren Cash's house was invaded. Computer taken. Telephone confiscated. Darren Cash did not preside over the loss of hundreds of millions of Bahamian dollars. Wasn't responsible. Wasn't responsible for the 100 million that went to resolve. Was not responsible for the undetermined amount that's still on the books of Bank of the Bahamas. None of those officials' houses were visited by the police. Not one of them. Not one board member house was visited. The Darren Cash house was visited. In most civilized countries with ethical leadership, whistleblowers are protected. In some cases even rewarded. But not in this Bahamas under this PLP. Instead, their houses are invaded.
Point of order. I just want...
Point of order, Chair recognizes Senator Storr.
I just want the good senator to be clear, because at the beginning of his current thread, I heard him say that police officers are the employee of a private law firm. Is he holding the government responsible for the actions of a private law firm? Because he did say it was a private law firm that sent the police officers to your house. Okay. I don't think it's fair to hold the government responsible for the actions of a private law firm, as you so clearly stated. A private law firm sent the police officers.
I would only say this. I would only say this, Senator Storr, that I was unprepared to be another Darren Cash. I can say that much in this honorable place. I'm not prepared to subject myself to any political intimidations, victimization, or threats. I will not take it lying down. I will not retreat from it. And I don't encourage other Bahamians to do the same. It is wrong. It is scandalous. If persons wish to protect their reputation in this country, don't do so by trying to be a bully. I'd say the private organizations, do not permit yourself to be used as a vehicle of any political force in this country. It is a new day. This generation of Bahamians, this senator will not accept it. I will not have my family subjected to what this government and its operatives or agents seek to do. I will not have them subjected to that. In short order, along with former Chairman Cash, we intend to take matters like this and every other Bahamian who's been experiencing this kind of victimization. We intend to raise the alarm in this country and, if necessary, outside this country, so that these leaders who wish to project an image of being Democrats, when they show up at international events, people can see them for who they are. In what country? In what country would a government wish to be seen, even if not in, wish to be seen as targeting chairmen of political parties? Which country? Which country?
Mr. Chairman.
Going in
Mr.
people's
Vice
houses
Chairman.
when friends and lovers
Mr.
continue to stay in their
Chairman,
jobs
I
after
rise
robbing the
on
Thank you very much.
point
Point of order,
order.
Senator Gibson.
I rise on a point of order, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Vice President, the Honourable Leader is winding down. He has a few seconds left on his contribution. But really, Mr. Vice President, it is shocking that the Honourable Leader is suggesting that a government, this government, by implication, is targeting the chairman of a political party. Mr. Vice President.
Please.
I think he is the chairman of the Free National
Please.
Movement.
I'm not
The
suggesting
chairman.
that.
There is a private matter
I'm not
that
suggesting that.
ought not to be discussed in this place anyway, especially because he's involved in it.
I suggest
Before the courts, it is a matter that is sub judice. For him to get up here and to seek to drag the government into this matter is unacceptable. And they keep on crossing the line. Mr. Vice President, I ask you to please ask the Honourable Senator, and I haven't gotten to the stage of calling him dishonourable yet, the Honourable
Only because that
Senator
swings both
to
ways. I think it's sitting
please
down.
stay on the... Mr. Vice President, you see, when a gentleman thinks that he can sit up there and bluster and threaten, it's a very sad day. This is the upper chamber. We don't need that in here. The Bahamian people would like to see intelligent and honourable debate, not threats issued whether standing or sitting.
That
And Mr.
technique
Vice
does not
President,
work.
I assure you
Does not work.
that this particular senator is not going to accept a threat from anybody in this place or anywhere.
Point of
else
order,
walking on 2 feet.
Mr. Vice
Mr. Vice
President. At
President,
no
I
point,
ask
at
you
no point did I
to
threaten,
please-
at no point did I
ask
threaten the
you
Attorney
to
General.
please
She's being
have the
disingenuous and
honourable
dishonest in her
member
communication.
in
Dishonest in her communication.
few
It
seconds
never
of
happened. It
remaining.
never happened.
Stand
Mr. Vice
in the
President,
rules of the Senate.
I
Please.
stand on a point of, Mr. Vice,
Thank you.
Mr. Vice
Thank you
President.
very much, Senator Gibson. Senator
Yes.
Pintard, you are...
I was, certainly the public would not have been able to hear what I said, and I take issue with the Attorney General seeking to characterize what I said as a threat. The point made by the Attorney General, I simply said it swings both ways. That's not a threat. And I know the technique. The technique is I'm speaking, so anything I accuse you of, once the public can't hear, they'll believe me. But I believe the report that we're looking here, I believe that what I have to say has more credibility than the leader opposite.
Honourable Senator,
Sorry, may I? Please, Mr. Look, the technique of obfuscation, we know, smoke and mirrors. There is an issue here, and that is that the senator has made an accusation
Yes,
against
which I
the
stand by.
government that cannot stand,
Which I
and I
stand by.
ask you to please protect. Every member of the government is giving public service a great sacrifice. They stand, as do I, under your protection. I am not targeting any chairman of any party, and no member of the government is targeting a chairman or any other member. And we stand under your protection. Please, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much.
President, it is my firm view
So Senator,
Senator
Senator,
Cash
please
and
have
myself
please have a seat.
are targeted
Madam Chair,
by this administration.
Honourable Senator, I'm really saddened to hear in our democracy any senator on any side seek to suggest that any government would operate in that manner.
Sad day.
But I want to caution all senators that when I heard the comments, in accordance with Rule 31 17, any reference to a matter awaiting or under adjudication in a court will not be permitted unless in the President's discretion that reference will not interfere in any material way with that court matter. This is likely to become a court matter. And so I caution any senator, whether it's that matter or any other matter that may arise in the future that order is pending, please don't bring it to the upper chamber, allow it to process and the matter to be dealt with appropriately. I think when any member who categorically states without the benefit of indicating in their opinion and referencing it as a matter of fact, when the chair will not permit it to stand, there's sure evidence to suggest that that is the case. Now, in your view, and you perhaps may be an affected party, which presents a new element to it, we have to be very careful as to the message that we're sending to the Bahamian public. And so, Honourable Senator, I would ask, and we do know the sensitivity of these matters, the personal nature of these matters, and we want to ensure that at all times we raise our debate to a higher level. And I'm not going to speak to that matter in any form as it's made a ruling, but I would ask that that particular reference be struck, because it goes in the wrong direction as to who we are as senators, who we are as legislators, and whom we all are around this table and in this chamber as honorable people. Any member can have his or her view on any subject. That view ought to be stated as their view, but to state it as a matter of fact which presents great concerns to the chair.
Mr. Vice President, officers visited my house. I take it personally, and I see it as being targeted. I would under no circumstances withdraw that point of view. Darren Chash,
It is so struck.
acting in the capacity as the chairman of the Free National Movement, had his house invaded. Unless there's some other, had his house invaded. No one from Bank of the Bahamas' house was invaded. His house was invaded.
Mr. Chairman,
That isn't political, but
I
it's.
also